All right, welcome back, everyone. Where are we today? We're about an hour outside of LA, and I'm afraid the Starbucks is a little loud today, and a little high energy for 7:30 in the morning here, but we're getting settled, and I'm going to be talking more about the economy today. It's been a fascinating couple of days coming down the West Coast and really getting to talk with some incredible innovators here. I'm getting my tea ready. We're going to talk to a lot of really interesting people, so I'm excited to be sharing what we're discussing. All right, we're going to add my dad in. We may have to do just a little bit of sound check to make sure you're not getting too much dance music. I guess we are on our way to Las Vegas, so. Hey, Dad. Can you hear me today? Good
Good
morning.
morning.
I can hear you okay. Can you hear us? All right. Yeah.
Yep.
Do
Can
you
you
feel
hear
like
me?
you're in a dance party?
Oh,
No,
I'm always in a
I mean
dance
from the
party. Isn't that
music.
the way it works? Oh, well, we're all participating in
I
different
know.
venues all the time. So today I'm
Okay.
actually at home, and and
Nice.
Mary's
Hi,
sitting here with
Mary.
me, so that's a good thing. She says hi.
Hi. She would be the talking voice behind the
So
curtain. We'll just call her Oz. Yeah.
there you
Yeah. Well,
go. So you're
I
meeting up with
am
Gary
meeting up
though
with
this
Gary this
morning too,
morning.
right?
So I got here, which is
We
impressive.
can't wait.
Had to get up at 5:30 this morning after being at the Lakers game last night till 11:30. Yeah,
Oh
so
my
we were in
goodness.
downtown
Oh,
LA, um, getting to participate and see everybody. We got to see Dwight Howard, who I haven't seen in a long time. So it was cool. I didn't even recognize him. His hair is so
wow.
different, but it was high energy,
Oh
packed
wow.
house, a lot of fun. But I was told
Great.
don't eat
Good.
the
Good for
hot dogs when you leave.
you.
I said, well, that's usually good.
Okay, I'll
That's
leave
usually
that
good
one
advice.
alone. Yeah,
Oh yeah,
good
well there's
advice.
all kinds. So we're
So,
discussing the economy today, but I don't have the topic.
oh, I sent you Federal Reserve
Federal
is where I went,
Reserve.
and
Oh
yeah, I
goodness.
was
All
going to.
right. So give me your intro.
Yeah,
What's your concern
yeah.
and thoughts?
Well, my intro is, and I don't know how many people know when it came about and how it was formed and why it was formed and that kind of stuff. So the quick
You're gonna give
down
us a
and
history lesson, huh?
dirty story is the fact is, I'll give you the quick lesson. It was formed in 1913 during the early years of the United States. Money has always been an issue. Doesn't matter which area of the world you go into. So it was always an issue here, and so banks were coming and going in relative crazy style, and what they ended up, you know, doing is to prevent what they called
Right.
panics at the time in the early 1900s. They that Congress decided, and it was looked upon after 1907, which was probably one of the worst panics ever. Um, that they needed to change that, so they formed what is called the Federal Reserve System. So the Federal Reserve Bank came into being. It was to help stabilize the money system within the USA. There's 12 Federal Reserve Bank systems around the country that all report to the Federal Reserve in Washington. Its powers have expanded considerably since the outset, but today it helps, uh, at least the mission is to help stabilize the money and currency system within the U.S. and also globally. Okay, so that brings us up to date for
Yeah.
today. And our money system around the world, and especially here in the United States, is very complex. But I think it's become complex just because we didn't want to use simple math to figure out what to do with it. We wanted to use complex methods of moving it around, so that's what's happening. The feds guarantee what you have in your bank up to a certain amount of money. That's helped stabilize a few things, but it also, as money became printed a lot more of it, and we got off the precious metal or the gold standard, which Nixon did in back, I think it was 71 or 72. Um, So that's where we're at today. That's part of the reason we have such a huge deficit too, is because we got off of that. And I know, I'm sure there's economists and all kinds of people around the world that probably argue with me about that issue. But I can't believe if we would have stuck there, our growth might have been slower. But the fact is that it would probably be a lot more stable in the house of cards we have today with a $22 trillion debt. So what do we do with it? And I know we've talked about the economy throughout our discussions here in our discussion, and it all kind of just everything still revolves around how we're going to spend money and what we're going to do with it. And do we spend more than we make? And if that's what we do, then we continue to grow debt, even though we're sitting down with interest that is actually, just crippling. It's really what the debt is. It's all interest so much, really, is what it comes to. Because we're spending. They say we have a balanced budget, but if you paid all your bills, you call yourself you had a balanced budget. But if you look behind the curtain, you got a debt that's coming up and hitting you in the face. It's a debt that's never going to be repaid. So, yeah. So give me your views on that kind of stuff and what you think. Is there a solution? I mean, I don't know if there is. I mean, I'm sitting here with every child being born today has a $350,000 debt, and they don't even know it.
I know. Well, there's lots to unpack there, right? So one of the first things that comes to mind is that the point of doing these kinds of actions, like you mentioned for the Federal Reserve, and making sure that we guarantee money is not about money at all, right? It's about perception. It's about feeling safe. And this is one of the big differences between the two parties is this concept that the government is here to give you a safety net versus you are self-reliant on local or external community groups. Do you have a TV on in the background, Dad?
I think Mary has her phone on. She's
listening.
I
can hear it. Yeah.
Can you hear that? Oh my goodness. Okay.
It's picking it all up.
That's all right.
I'll turn it down.
We'll still bear with it. Don't. Everybody has sounds. We'll just have to deal.
Turn it down.
She turned it down.
Yeah, it's funny. Things get amplified on the microphone. That's why I was asking about the music.
Right.
So anyway, yes, we do these things to try and assure people that they're safe and they're secure, and it's very emotional based. And then, like you said, it comes around and we actually cause another problem by solving one. And so we have to be really careful about that. Then you talk about the debt at $22 trillion. And I've worked the numbers 800 ways to Sunday. And I'm pretty good with numbers. I can find spaces, and I have found some spaces. We can absolutely bring it down. It cannot be done in one administration. And it probably can't even be done in one generation. And it requires, it's actually an underpinning, a foundational point in my whole tour. Because what do you do when you're a family that says, you know what? Our bills exceed the money we're making. Our debt is now at a point where we're paying more in interest than we are actually spending or that we could ever catch up with, which means it's going to snowball. And what you do in a family is you say, all right, number one, everybody who has a job needs a better job. And number two, anybody who doesn't have a job needs to pitch in some way. So with that concept in mind, going around the country and finding solutions that don't cost taxpayers is akin to saying, everybody, ante up. If you've got skilled capabilities and you can participate in helping this country, which I have absolutely found everybody's interested in doing, and we can reduce the amount of costs that we're using through the federal government, then we reduce the debt, we increase support for our people, and we still allow for that safety factor, but we make it external to the taxpayer dollar. It's a really interesting approach that no one has ever used, but would be very easy to execute from a federal government perspective. And then the last one that comes to mind is I think the book is called Poor Man, Rich Man, or Poor Dad, Rich Dad, or something like that. Anyway, the concept is that there is a cultural difference between how people approach money who come from poor families versus how people approach money who come from rich families. In poor families, we are at a position where we have to get a job to eat. We have to make sure that our health care is covered. We have to make sure that we are working to meet the ends justify the means, right? That we're really just trying to get that money in order to pay the basics. Wealthier families, all my friends at college, they got jobs for experience, not for how much it paid. They were able to find those jobs that allowed them to travel so that when they applied to that next job, they would have this incredible resume. I was still at the pharmacy, right? The point is the decision making is totally different because they're planning for the future, they're investing themselves, they are making those connections, and they're operating and approaching money differently. We as a nation are acting like a poor country, even though we are a wealthy nation. We are responding to immediate worries and concerns. We're trying to put band-aids on major issues. We're running from fire to fire when we really should be stepping back and having a better plan and approach. Because we're making these decisions, in fact, our discussion yesterday, if you missed it, with the Institute of Creative Technologies, and one of his points was that research dollars are starting to be less and less invested, not just across the other 14 departments, but including defense. What that means is we're not investing in the future like we used to. What it means is we're only building for today. We will end up with a gap. We will end up with a major lack of readiness problem. And that very well may open us up to very serious military action against us on our home soil. All the way around, this is approach difference, right? This is about thinking like the wealthy nation that we are, preparing our people for the future, setting up safety nets that are not tied to government, that are empowering to all of our people and everybody who has these skills around the country. You become a facilitator instead of a regulator.
Yeah, I think the task becomes not so much like the rich people, or we call them rich, or the preparers and planners. Let's use it that term because I think that's more appropriate at this point. As we're talking about planners and people who focus on the future rather than on the immediate. What the difference is that if you haven't really seen how planning for the future works and how it is profitable, you tend to live day to day. I mean, you don't. Plus, a lot of people, if you talk to them, even with young people, especially in the lower income areas and stuff like that, they don't even believe they're going to live past their 25th birthday in some cases in some of the really struggling areas. So to sit down and talk to them about long-term planning is like talking to a wall. I mean, they're not going to understand that, and they're not going to be able to. They're just glad they got up this morning and they were able to eat something. And so those are real struggles that I know education can help and improve and stuff, but it's getting the message down to that level if we can. The other thing is, even in the planners that you're talking about, they're planning for themselves rather than as a group. And that's even a harder task, I think. When you talk about an individual who spends, I'll give them the minimum, 4 years at college to put on I'm getting your music now.
All right, give me 1 second. Let me see if I can turn this. Let me get this light down.
Go.
That didn't work, did it? Woo.
Well, everyone, I'm going to continue to talk a little bit while Jenny's making arrangements here. And here she comes back, and so we can talk about different things. I continue to talk a little bit, so I'll just let you know.
The sun is coming up in California.
Don't worry about the sun.
It was blinding me. I couldn't.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Our venues have had to with travels. That's the way it goes and different things. Yeah, exactly. But the group planning is where I think if the only way we're really going to survive, and that was, when we talk about Federal Reserve, that was part of the problem too. Every bank was an individual bank, and they were all participating and managing themselves through an individual basis rather than as a group and and stuff. The one thing that I think has been difficult through this process, and we'll go to the Federal Reserve versus the way I look at it, when we allowed all the banks to travel across state lines and stuff like that, while it was great for business in some fashion and form, the smaller investors and the smaller businesses really didn't. I don't think were well suited for it, and it didn't help them. I think and then the lending process became much more, especially through the 80s and stuff, became so much, how should I say, volatile, simply because of the practices. When you had smaller banks loaning out money, they were very prudent about how they did it. It was like the old saying, you borrow $10 and it's your problem, and if you borrow $1 million, it's mine. That's the bank mantra, and you don't repay it. The bank was in dire straits if they loaned out $1 million and the person couldn't sit down, or the entity couldn't repay it. That got out of control. They were lending money to people that definitely didn't deserve to get a loan and whatever at that point, or were on house of cards, lending practices. So does it cure itself? I don't think it's cured itself yet. It's still out there having, struggles. They've tried to put Band-Aids and stuff like you indicated. But we'll go back to the planning part. I think the mission from your standpoint, and I'm just putting this out as an issue, is convincing the money people, whether they're individuals planning for the future, whatever, that they're planning as a group rather than as an individual, which is going to be a very hard task at it by itself. I think you're talking about Ready Nation, and I think that's the whole thing. This is a nation. We can divide it up any way you want, and then whoever's comes out on top is the winner, or we can do it as a group, and we can do it and all win at the same time. So, your mission is twofold when it comes to that part. Yes, education, but also getting everyone to realize they're on the same ship.
Well,
and the ship has to work.
Not everybody is on the same ship. So I had an experience in government where we contacted one of the more, we'll not just call them a large company. We'll call them, a meta global, meta nation company, right, across the globe. And they said, why do we want to talk to you? And I thought, everybody's talking. Everybody wants to talk to me. I'm calling from the Pentagon. But then I thought about it, and I realized, as they very rightly pointed out, we don't need the U.S. government. We're big enough to control other governments. And they were correct, as much as I didn't want to agree with them, and I didn't like the sentiment. It was something to consider and approach. The reactive answer is to say, you're on American soil, we're going to force you to operate in a way that directly benefits Americans immediately. The alternative thing to do is to step back and recognize they will just pick up and move because they have the power now to do that. So this notion that we're going to be able to just force people to comply with American rules, expectations, and employ our workers, I think it's very naive, and I think it's going to backfire, that force, using the tariffs, using the force of American workers. However, you get into the numbers and you start delving in and you start looking at what is unique about our country. How do we compare to the other nations? What do we have that they can't just go employ somewhere else? And we have a lot of those things, right? We're the largest exporter of services. We are the largest in travel exports. We can make a ton of money having people come in here and pay a portion of our taxes. We can empower our people to use the creativity and diversity that we have in this nation to our advantage. So I don't think what it is, Dad, that you convince people that they have to somehow come down from where they are in order to participate in a collective for the country. Instead, what you do is say, if you operate alone, you're going to have one small but whole pie. If you operate together, you'll have a large piece of a larger pie, and you'll benefit substantially from that connectivity. that's when you start to have a bigger impact. And when we have something as a nation that can't be achieved as easily individually, but can be elevated collectively, now we're on the global stage, again, not regulating or forcing, but actually selling a product, a commodity, a service that is uniquely capable in the United States. And this is absolutely achievable. But we are stronger when we're together. It's called the Gestalt, right? The whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Right.
What you need then is a blueprint of how that pie is drawn. And that blueprint drives that infrastructure and connectivity and allows you to be able to sell more, employ American workers, empower our young people to be ready for jobs of the future. And you start to turn the economy into a place of elevation instead of constantly being reactive.
Right. Well, and that's, I think, and I think, the reality also is that there's a lot of, everyone thinks that we're the only nation struggling with this, and that's not the case. I mean, every small or large, I mean, some of the smaller nations, which you've already pointed out are much more capable because they're so small and they can maneuver and we're the oil tanker and they're
Right.
the speedboat. They can make some changes. And with the internet and with all the electronic now communicating, the way we can move money and stuff, they can
Yes.
be quite nimble within that world. And we are kind of hindered by our size and
Right.
how we exercise. However, the thing is that we still do create a tremendous amount of activity through what you said about services. We don't manufacture a tremendous amount of stuff when we really look at what we do. You're absolutely right. We provide more services now than we have in the past, and we don't manufacture. The one thing that we do have, and I think I heard some discussion regarding our mining and mineral deposits that live in our United States, where we're importing a tremendous amount of external. I think that's also a wise option, though, is that if we can continue to import at a reasonable price. Why exhaust out? Some people say, well, let's isolate ourselves and then sit down and just use what we have here. Why? That doesn't make any sense. It's much more long-term planning to import a bunch of stuff and keep all our resources at reserve rather than sit down and start exhausting that reserve. Let's go out and keep that intact. That does give us some power at some point, and we've seen it in the oil industry where maybe the methods of extracting are still up for debate, but the fact is we can produce a tremendous amount of fossil fuel at this point, which goes back to another subject that we talked about environmentally before, and that's where this whole thing is an ecosystem, like you so vastly pointed out. But I do want to go back to the point of, I think we still, in my thoughts, and I know I don't want to be too talking collective stuff, but we work on an individual basis here. This is where our country grew from. This is how we broke away from the European world of certain families controlling everything from the monarchies to lords of whatever and everything else. And so that's the glory and the blessing of this country, is that it still creates opportunities for folks that had no title, had no nothing, and grew up and had a garage and decided to have a great idea, and it was promoted and they won. If you look at the billionaires that exist today in our country, probably if you go back more than one or two generations, they were all poor. I mean, when I say poor, they were not mega $1 million pass downs. Yeah, there's still a Rockefellers and maybe some of the Vanderbilt money laying around and all that kind of stuff. But the majority of the people who made it today were, their families 50 years ago didn't have money, or we're talking billionaires. So that's. If you want it, there's still some opportunity to make that happen.
There is.
Individuals.
However, what people are starting to notice is that the power structure and the closed doors are happening more and more again. And so what we need to do, it's not just about education, it's about game rules and empowering access and empowering people to understand how to navigate those mazes. we're working on that. We're working that on the team. We're connecting people through this journey, and so there'll be some announcements coming soon. So stand by.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm glad about that. I think some of the things, one of the things that, and I even stated it the other day about us stumbling. You know, our nation has stumbled through a lot of different things
Right.
and maybe come out sometimes, most of the time, better than worse. I mean, we've certainly made some gigantic errors in our existence, but that's the great thing about progress. We can maybe fix some of those as we go. But one of the things, it was just happenstance. I was listening to, I think it was CBS Morning, Sunday morning. Anyhow, they had the head of the Land O'Lakes cooperative.
Right.
Okay, she's a woman, and an interesting fact came out is that in farming now today, almost a third of the farmers today, especially dairy farmers, are women. And I'm really applauding that. I know I keep saying that. I applaud, I keep seeing more and more of this going on. The chairman of Land O'Lakes is a woman. All these kinds of things. And I think that, we need to raise the flag for that kind of stuff too. I think that's important and goes with how we get off subject, because I can go off subject so fast.
We'll rope it together here, Dad. You're absolutely right. We need to bring everyone to the table, and we need to be having these conversations more and more. Well, thank you, Dad. I will touch base with you in another week. So send me that topic next time. We're on our way.
I'll send you a topic. Are we on economy? We're still on the economy
we are,
next
in fact,
week, right?
But as a little update, I'm heading to Las Vegas, and we will be doing a heck of an episode on government, the three-ring circus. I'll be actually working with some of the folks from Cirque du Soleil over the next 2 days, and we're going to be relating tangibly how the circus can help us understand policy. So this ought to be interesting. Yes,
I think that's a good one. When
He's
do
sitting
you meet
right
up
here,
with Gary?
so I'm going to go ahead and run. And
Can we go live on this, or is it just?
I'll shoot you a text, Dad. All right, we'll talk to you later.
Super. All right, love you, girls. Take care. Be safe. Say hello to